I'm sure that most of you would have picked up on the news reports in recent weeks of the stories of what's been happening on the campus of the University of Stellenbosch in the Wilgenhof men's residence. Part of their initiation process that has been going on for many years, I think it started in the early 1900s, and each year they would have this initiation process that has taken on the nature of being something quite honestly awful. I'm sorry if there's some of you from Wilgenhof who would defend that. It's hard for those of us on the outside to hear of what has been happening and to feel comfortable with that. And one of the words that is used by those who would defend the process and say, well, it's been going on for a century or more, is that you've got to understand it in its context. In its context. And by that they mean you need to understand the circumstances surrounding how this thing arose and how it got to be what it is. And now I understand them arguing that way. However, I have no understanding whatsoever of them trying to apologize or to even accept and say that it is acceptable for what is currently happening in this initiation process in Wilgenhof men's residence. And I really feel sorry if there are some of you who have been there and maybe feel offended by what I'm saying, but you need to know that from the outside it looks awful. It looks awful. Context. It's a word often used by our politicians, isn't it? They make a blups and then they say, no, I was taken out of context. As if that's the excuse. But context is also a word that you've heard me use often here from up front. The context of reading the scriptures. We need to understand the context. Now, God can speak and He can take a phrase out of scripture and apply it to your life. That's what the Holy Spirit does. And for many of us, we would have, at different stages, had God suddenly speak through His word, through just a word or a phrase or a sentence. And that's good and that is great and that should be expected. But you cannot take that and make that a teaching for the church. If we're going to be teaching in the church, we need to be teaching in the context in which the scripture was written. And what is often happening these days through so-called prophecies that I get over WhatsApp messages, etc., is that there's a phrase that someone has latched onto, and this has suddenly become the God's prophetic word for the nation, and we all need to respond appropriately. I have a big problem with that. We need to be understanding God's word in its context. And one of the things about Jesus' stories is that He always told the stories in a context. There was something happening in the background, and Jesus then told a story in order to bring about some truth into that context, whatever it was. Now, my favorite chapter in the Bible is Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 is something that you know well. It's the story of the headings, will say, the story of the lost sheep, of the lost coin, and the lost son. You know that very well. But the context for that chapter is given in the first two verses. And here's the context, because Luke probably brought those 3, 4 stories together because he wanted to teach something in context. Or Jesus would have told those stories because something was happening. And in the context, He told these stories in order to bring about greater understanding. So what was the context? The context of Luke chapter 15 is given in the first 2 verses. The context is this. Now the tax collectors and sinners, think corrupt government officials, prostitutes. That's who Jesus was mixing with. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Him. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law, the religious leaders of the community, Pharisees and teachers of the law, muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Do you see the context? The religious leaders were objecting to what Jesus was doing and saying. And they were suggesting that this could not be of God because God would not mix with tax collectors and sinners. That's what was going on here. And you're all familiar with the three stories. And in those three stories, the prime reason for Jesus telling the stories is to say, this is what God is like. This is what God is like. We tend to think of it as the story of the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. Those are the subheadings that are given in most of our Bibles. But it's not really about lost sheep. The story is about a shepherd who goes to look for the lost sheep, about a woman who's determined to find the lost piece of jewelry, about a father who is willing to receive his son or his sons and welcome them home. And this morning I want to just highlight the story that is the fourth story in this passage, really, which is the story of the older brother. The story of the older brother. The story of the older brother, which is the last part of the chapter. You all know the story of the younger brother. He's rebellious and he leaves home and squanders all that he's been given. And we read this in Luke chapter 15, verse 22 to 32, that the father has run out to meet him and to welcome him home, and it continues like this. The father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. They began to celebrate. I sometimes think we've lost understanding of true celebration. I have this picture in my mind of the people of the Mediterranean regions knowing how to celebrate. And that's probably based on this advert. I can't remember. Will it come to mind? It might come to mind now. But it's an advert for, I think, wine in a certain place. And the advert starts with these people in the village looking miserable and sitting around, trying to get through the day. And then someone brings the wine along, grazza. Is that it? Shows how good the ad was. And then you see the change and the celebration as people take on this grazza. And I have this picture of that being how celebration takes place. And this was a noisy celebration. But there was the celebration, but it wasn't the whole story. Because we read that meanwhile, the older son was in the field. He wasn't around when his brother came home. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. This was a noisy celebration. He heard this. And he recognized that something was happening of which he was not a part. And he suddenly must have started to feel a little bit hesitant. What is going on here now? I don't understand this. And so he called one of his servants and he asked him what was going on. He doesn't want to go in himself, doesn't want to get associated with this, and he's a little bit suspicious about what is happening. And the servant says, "Your brother has come home. Your brother, this one who squandered everything, this rebellious one. Your brother has come home. But not only has he come home, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Your father has gone the extra mile to want to celebrate the fact that this rebellious brother of yours has come home. This good for nothing. And dad has pulled out all the stops." But look at the brother's response. The older brother. The older brother became angry. And again, we mustn't just gloss over that. It's easy to read that. But to read that he became angry. With who? With the father for throwing the party? Maybe with his brother? Maybe just his circumstances? Who knows? Wondering how could a party be thrown for someone who has blown it so badly? Just like the Pharisees. Those accusers, those who said to Jesus, how can you come and bring God into this circumstance where you've got corrupt officials, where you've got prostitutes, the sinners of the community? How can you bring God into that? Just like the Pharisees who refused to be part of what Jesus was saying, the brother was angry and refused to go in. He wasn't going to join this celebration. He wasn't going to join them. He becomes petulant, childish perhaps. I'm not going to be part of that. I'm better than that. You don't see me behaving like that, youngster. Maybe the Pharisees saying, you don't see us behaving like these sinners that you spend time with. But look at what his father does. Look at what the father does. Here's the key to the whole story. So his father went outside and pleaded with him. Pleaded with him. 9-word sentence. So easy to overlook, but it is the key to the whole story. The father went outside and pleaded with him. You see, because this is fundamental to Jesus' purpose in telling the story, because in the context, he's saying, I want you to know what God is like. And the father went out even to the angry, petulant son, resentful son, and he pleaded with him. I don't want to get caught up in Greek grammar here, but there's something that you should know about that word pleaded. It's easy to read it and think, oh, he just pleaded, said, come on, come inside. But in Greek, when you talk in the Old Testament about tenses, there's the aorist tense, which means something happened once and it was over. Christ died for sinners once for all. That's the aorist tense. Happened, finished. This was in the imperfect tense. It's called the imperfect tense. And the imperfect past tense means that there is a continuation. It happened in the past, but it wasn't just a one-off thing. It continued. There was a continuation of what happened. So this is what the scholars say about it. It was a continuing situation in the past. The imperfect tense always conveys past activity that was more than a single action in some way. There was an ongoing aspect to the tense. It indicates an action which has gone on over a period of time. This word pleaded was much more like the father spent time pleading with him, pleading with him, pleading with him. Don't be like that, the father was saying. He was hardened, he was angry, but the father continues to plead. Don't know how long it took. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. You gave me nothing. You've ignored me. It's like I don't exist. You're not caring about how conscientious I've been in what I am doing. And he's starting to justify himself. Maybe he's envious of what the father's doing for this rebellious brother. But there's something inside of him that resents the fact that he has not been acknowledged for something. But when the son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you killed the fattened calf for him. You went the extra mile for him. And he's angry. And he's lashing out now at the father. Critical spirit, full of resentment. Petulant. Just like the Pharisees in the context of this chapter. We don't associate with those people because God is not like that. We are the religious leaders of this community and we know what's going on. And he accuses the Father of being, they accuse Jesus of being unjust and of doing wrong. You know, that's what religion does to people. Religion does that. It creates a sense of arrogance. I'm right and you're wrong. It creates a sense of resentment when you start seeing those people who are wrong being welcomed and accepted. Sometimes stirring up anger, and often with a deeply critical spirit. Deeply critical spirit. You see, religion is full of self-righteousness, and it doesn't understand the heart of the Father. Religion doesn't understand deep down how much the Father loves the rebellious Son. But not only the rebellious Son, the obviously rebellious Son, but maybe even the not so obviously rebellious Son, who also was prepared to say, but look how conscientious I've been. Look how good I've been. I've attended church since I was a teenager. I've given my tithes. I've done all the right stuff. Now how come you're blessing all these other people? The younger son was rebellious. The older son was self-righteous, religious. Yet it's the older son who is as much in need of the grace and kindness of the Father as is the rebellious son. The not obviously rebellious son still needs love and mercy and grace. And the Father, Jesus tells us, the Father came and pleaded with him. Can you imagine what the Father's saying to him? It's God who welcomes both the rebellious and the not so obviously rebellious, the religious. My son, the Father said, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. I'm not denying you anything, but I want you to hear my heart. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Don't you understand this? And often those who are just critical and resentful and angry and petulant can't see that in what God is doing. Can't see it. And Jesus, in wanting to show what the Father is like, is saying, I want you to know that the Father loves the rebellious as well as the not so obviously rebellious. And you Pharisees, you're not obviously rebellious. You're religious to the nth degree. But you can't see the heart of the Father in wanting to demonstrate his love, his grace, his mercy, his kindness to everyone. What kindness, what compassion. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and was alive. He was lost and is found. You know, I sometimes wonder about here at United Church in recent months. We've baptized after a service a number of people who have come and testified about how their lives have been changed from darkness to light, from death to life. And they've been baptized as a sign of saying, this is what has happened to me. And the most awkward time of any baptism for me is at the end. At the end. When nobody seems to know quite what to do. And some will say, yeah, oh great. shouldn't we be celebrating? Shouldn't we be celebrating? Shouldn't we be at least singing out loud or cheering or something? We went to see Mamma Mia last night? No, night before last, not last night. Went to see Mamma Mia. And boy, the people were going from before they started, they were clapping and celebrating Mamma Mia. Maybe we need to be celebrating Papa Mia as well. The goodness of God amongst us. And maybe just choosing to set aside the resentment, the criticism, that critical spirit, the anger that is inside of us, recognizing how good God is. Because that's why Jesus told the story. We don't know how the story ended. We don't know if the son responded well and went in and joined the celebration. We don't know that. We don't know if he marched off back out into the fields. We don't know. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because it does leave it open for each of us. But also because Jesus had already made his point. His point wasn't about the sons. His point was about the Father. The Father. The Father who ran and welcomed the rebellious son, and the Father who went out and pleaded with the not-so-rebellious son. But both needed grace. Both needed grace. You sometimes find yourself feeling like the older brother. You need to know that your Father loves you. Father loves you. You don't have to be angry at what he's doing and what other people are experiencing, how they're experiencing his presence and his love. And the Father is pleading with you. Come inside. Don't stand on the outside and criticize. Come inside. Join the party. Some of the translations talk about him begging you. He's pleading with you. Come and join the celebration. Won't you just respond to whatever God is saying?